Alrighty, hello every folks, and good morning. Alright, so something a little bit out of partially left field here today. I was actually planning to do a bit of a kind of early access thing for an indie thing that, well, doesn't seem to want to work right now, so while that's reinstalling itself, I wanted to cover a topic that has come up a little bit over the years on the channel, which is what's the deal with the obsession with PS Vitas on this channel? Why is it that I always talk up this device? Because, hey, there's more powerful stuff up there, there's cheaper stuff out there. What's the deal with the PS Vita? Like, isn't it an expensive paperweight? So that's kind of what I want to discuss a little bit. So the Vita, obviously, like, official history of the whole thing is basically just Sony wanted to make a PSP2, essentially, and it's funny to this day, even the jailbreak site calls it the PSP2. And for all intents and purposes, the device itself is fantastic at doing that particular job. While there are people who disagree on whether things look better or worse on different things, personally, I've always been of the opinion that the PS Vita makes PSP games look nicer. There's certain games that I'm assuming folks just aren't used to seeing on a bigger screen without some kind of emulation effects on there. I don't know. Personally, to my mind, the kinds of games that I usually play, like especially Tactics Ogre, the Armored Core games, the Metal Gear Acid series, that kind of stuff looks fantastic on a Vita, and it's stuff that you've seen on the channel. Like, almost all times that I've covered those things have been off of a PS Vita directly. So, why did the device fail? Well, it's the frickin' memory cards. That's something that's been very well documented at this point. But some absolute gigabrain genius decided that these things needed to run off these stupid memory cards, if we end up seeing one in the pictures here somewhere. But basically, the little M2 cards that they decided to use were used by one other camera that Sony produced, and basically had tiny spaces, were stupidly expensive, and, well, were extremely prone to failure. That's something that also, while I've talked up the Vita, I've regularly gone and brought up the fact that these memory cards are, at least in my experience and many other folks' experience, absolute hot trash. As in, like, without the SD to Vita mod, I probably would not have stuck with the device, because I had 3 of those memory cards fail on me before, and 2 of them were practically new. So, okay, let's talk about the kind of unique stuff that this device does, because oftentimes the comparisons that get made are to, like, let's say more modern, like, Retroid type of devices or what have you, or to phones directly, or to a Switch or something like that. But the stuff that the Vita does well is stuff that no other device has done properly up to this point, strangely enough, aside from the Game Boy Advance, when it was back in its original unlit version. This seems like a very weird comparison, but let me explain. So personally, the reason that I was stuck with the PS Vita was, if you'll take a look at this thing, the fact that it's got a very slim profile without actually losing the power of a more modern device. So it is able to run a lot of things that would effectively be considered like PS3 type of games, while at the same time being something that you can very quickly pocket. And this is a feature that was a major part of the PSP as well. But basically, when it comes to the PSP and the Vita, they're very, very pocketable devices. It's what I personally always like to call quick draw factor, like, mentally speaking. It sounds stupid when you say it out loud, but, like, as you know, I'm a dad of 3. There's going to be a lot of situations when something random is going on in the background, and I'm usually, like, keeping one eye on whatever's in front of me and then one eye off in the background, just trying to always, catch stuff before it happens. Like, oh, toddler's in the other room over there about to go, dump some grape juice on, on top of the dog or something, and so you have to be able to make those quick maneuvers of quickly shutting off the device, throwing it in a pocket, running over there, and just sliding in to stop that situation from happening, which sounds way cooler than it really is. But at any rate, these devices are in many ways perfect for that kind of thing. The quickly being thrown around, they have a lot of agility to them. The sticks specifically are something that, like, I wish that something like Retroid or whatever else would have actually copied, because in many cases, a lot of these companies are still going for the kind of big console experience, the Switch experience, like, oh, I need to have my full thumb indent in there. It's like, no, dude, you just need like a little nub thing. That's all you really need. This is a pocket device. It's designed to be as such. And so, for example, with these ones, you notice that these sticks don't stick out very much, especially on the originals. This is actually something that I wish I'd actually played around with the 1000 model a lot earlier. It's a model that I actually haven't had a whole lot of hands-on time with until recently, and I absolutely love how slightly more recessed the sticks are. Like, it isn't even that big of a thing. It's just the comparison of the rest of the chunky section to the stick. Like, technically the 1000s are a bit chunkier, but more of the weight is on the opposite end of where the stick is, meaning that you can very quickly move that thing in and out of a pocket. It's a very, very handy feature for those that need it. And no other device that I've tested, whether it's any of these random emulation devices or whatever else, can match that outside of just using a phone. So why not just use a phone? Because in many ways the PS Vita is essentially kind of like a phone plus controller, except compacted into just having a second game phone with you, which, is all well and good. In fact, one of the things I've regularly said is a cool feature of this thing is the fact that you can basically have this thing out and people assume that you're on a phone, so nobody questions it. Whereas if you show up with a Switch, like, oh, look at, what you're playing. Like, I don't want to have this conversation. Just let me play my dang Tactics Ogre. Go away. Let me be antisocial in peace, damn it. But anyway. So yeah, when it comes to these devices, they're very solid as both, like, just kind of like a stealthy pocket game option. They've got a very slim profile, while at the same time having a very, very wide library. Now, again, to go back to direct comparisons here real quick, pairing with the 3 Plus here, right? So this is going to be one that is oftentimes very directly compared. And yeah, in terms of having an Android emulator kind of thing, it does have that particular potential to it. However, having tried Retroids myself, having talked with a lot of folks that love these devices and whatever else, they do still run into a very regular problem that Android devices run into, that the Vita does not. And this is going to be, again, a weirdly specific issue, but it goes back to what I was talking about earlier about a pocketable device being actually pocketable. Because I'm sure I'm not the only one that was using a Retroid before, or was using my phone, or what have you, and was playing a PSP game, only to shut it down and then come back and be welcomed with a main menu. So you might be saying, wait, just go and save state it. Okay, that is a half a second type situation that you do not have when you're going and immediately responding to something. And again, for most situations, for folks that aren't running around like complete spazzes all the time, something like a Retroid would absolutely probably do the job better in their hands. And generally would be something that would last a little bit longer. That being said, that company itself is one that has kind of had a reputation over the years of just, well, building devices that last about 1 to 3 years. I know when I got my 2 Plus personally, the thing came with a bunch of hardware defects. Pretty much everybody that I've talked to that has kept a Retroid for any length of time has had a similar issue. It seems like Ambernick has been a bit better with all of that. But again, when it comes to all of these kind of Retroid-type devices, the idea is very similar to the Vita, but when it comes to shutting stuff down, a lot of those emulators are going to do the usual emulator thing. They're trying to do the computer thing, they will try to save space, they'll put themselves into, a more advanced kind of sleep mode thing, you'll end up losing progress, they'll end up glitching out due to some weirdly specific thing, and again, this can be said of the Vita in different forms as well, but there's a lot of situations where I found the Vita just generally did those particular things better. Like XCOM EU is a game I absolutely love, and the PS Vita version is one that you can shut down, come back to, shut down, come back to, no issues whatsoever. When it comes to playing the Android version, it's one that I've gone back to over the years, and I always end up getting a bit frustrated with the thing because eventually it starts kicking you back to the main menu, and so you're waiting for those load times over and over and over again. You want to play some GTA SA, again, load times, and you're going and getting those loads restarted and what have you. Don't get me wrong, there's a lot of things that, Android stuff will have at this point that something like a Vita can't handle, though that list is shrinking with every new port that ends up going back to the old thing. For those that didn't know, the Vita's basically just been a dumping ground for a lot of kind of Android ports. So, for example, there were ports of Fallout 2 and stuff like that. I believe somebody was making Fallout Tactics. I think somebody was trying to make Morrowind happen, but either way, a lot of those ports, generally speaking, make themselves back to the Vita. was that even a sentence? Anyway, they travel back to the Vita. It's not a very quick process, but they all keep going backwards. Like even something like Sonic Mania got ported to the Vita. The thing is basically a port machine. Um, but anyway, so in terms of that kind of agility factor, and in terms of the ability to actually use a sleep mode properly without resetting anything, I feel like that doesn't get enough coverage because it's like, oh, it's a less powerful device. Yeah, it sure is, but the thing also does not have those weirdly specific issues. And it's something I've talked to different emulator communities about. Like, is there a way to stop this issue from happening? And it generally just comes down to, well, every phone that we gotta set this up for has some kind of different internal rule set for what it's going to close down in order to save memory, because it keeps constantly needing to run that stuff in the background. Whereas for something like this, it just seems to be able to, for whatever reason, shut everything down entirely and just wake it up in the exact same state. So either way, I'm sure somebody can offer a more technical reasoning behind a lot of this stuff, but that's part of it. Now, part of the reason that I have these breakdowns open for a PS Vita is the other thing. I've seen video after picture after horror story after whatever else for all kinds of different emulator devices, and man, especially the Steam Deck, it just hurts you in the soul to see a Steam Deck destroyed. But when it comes to Sony devices, and again, think what you will about Sony as a company. Personally, I've always really loved their headphones. I've really loved their handhelds because of the way that they're designed. That they seem to almost be designed to just either be fixed up or just not break in the first place. So one thing you'll notice when looking at the internals of all of these things, they're broken down into multiple boards here for one thing, but for another, they typically will have, if I can find them here, they'll typically have a lot of kind of skeleton pieces all throughout the dang thing that will be really good at taking impacts. Now, I mentioned this specifically not in terms of theoretical knowledge, but I love fixing these devices, because I love sharing those stories over, like, this thing got beat to shit and kept functioning properly. There was a thing that I was sharing on the Discord a little while ago that was a Vita that I fixed up that had a dresser, like, directly dropped onto its screen corner first. How many devices do you have that can survive a, again, apparently wooden dresser dropped corner first straight onto the screen? And I'm talking about, like, survive in the long term, not just get completely destroyed. And that thing was not only destroyed, it was literally missing chunks of its screen. And it still was able to play normally. Like, as soon as it arrived, I'm like, oh man, I'm going to have to get this thing a new screen, new analog sticks or what have you. I cleaned out the analog sticks. One of them was crushed in and it still functioned normally. The other one had the rubber bits, like this little bit right here, shaved off. It still functioned normally. It had a little bit of drift, so eventually I replaced them. The screen itself I replaced for just for the purpose of having it look better, but I actually still have the thing sitting on my desk to this day, just as a reminder. Like, it again was physically missing chunks and still did all of its jobs correctly. Like, while there are occasional errors and whatever else with this device, like on a software level, it's nothing that you can't work around, and pretty much all the kind of design issues from every angle seem to be for the purpose of safety. Like, if it runs into a stupid issue, most of the time the problems that you run into with a Vita device are going to be things like, well, it doesn't start up. Okay, so just hold home, hold R, and then push the power button. Did it turn on? No. Okay, there's only a handful of things that could possibly get it to that state. So, like, recently I fixed one up that had been pulled up from a lake. Again, I don't know the full extent of it, but it's the only possible explanation that could happen for how absolutely fucked up rusty that board was. But it had water damage thoroughly. It was literally missing a chunk. Like, if I can find a picture of 1000 here, it had a chunk right here that was just missing out of its shell. I'm assuming, like, the story that came to mind when I was looking at this thing, because the original, like, pawn shop that had it didn't know, was that somebody probably chucked it out of their pocket and hit a rock on the way down into the river or something. I don't know. But that thing was messed up. Anyway, some scrubbing later, and a new battery, because the battery was pretty well swollen at that point, and it ended up working pretty decently fine for a while there. In that particular case, apparently it had been submerged long enough that it actually got into these areas under the shielding right here. So, like, there's 4 areas that are shielded off here, and it had basically rusted straight underneath all of that. And so finally, after a bit of tinkering and whatever else, it turned out the GPU apparently crapped out on the thing, so it eventually had to be retired for parts this morning. But like it again, that was still a like $30 part away from being a fully functional device again. Basically, when it comes to these devices, and this again applies backwards to the PSP as well, but they're rarely more than like one or two parts, one or two quick available parts away from just being back to normal, of going and functioning again. The device is a very fixable device. There's very few things that you can't go back and repair on them. There's very few things that can cause you to just abandon a repair for these things. Like, I can't even tell you how many PS3s I tried to repair over the years, and I think I only had one long-term success out of that, because there were just so many things that could go wrong. But yeah. So, just basically from a survivability and agility perspective, the way that it's able to start and stop without the usual kind of phone issues of either draining through your battery or just kicking you back to a home screen and stuff like that. It doesn't have those issues. And again, even when it's running Android stuff, like there's a popular port of GTA San Andreas for this one. It basically takes the mobile port, which is serviceable. It's not great, but it's serviceable. A bit difficult to play, and it basically just re-adds stuff from the PS2 version. There's people that have even gone and put all of the original music back on there. And basically just goes and runs this on the Vita. Unlike the Android version, it doesn't constantly have issues of trying to figure out which save you're using. It doesn't have issues of like, oh, do you use the local save or the cloud save? I can't remember which frickin' thing you're on. It doesn't have issues of kicking you back to the home screen. It doesn't have issues of just saving you in random locations and insisting that's your latest save file, which it's a weird problem with that game. Like, you'll look at your latest save file and it's probably like fourth down your list over the last time you saved, but good luck figuring out which one of those autosaves is actually the newest one. Anyway, so there's again a lot of unique functions to the Vita that just don't get discussed that often. Like, the repairability factor is something that I wish would have been, a bit more of a discussed thing on something like the Retroid there. Oh, actually, look at that. I think somebody actually put some Vita sticks in there. There's kind of always just been this thing for a lot of these retro devices that just like as soon as they're dead, you just get a new one. Because in many cases, you're better off buying a new one than trying to save the thing, given how cheap they are. But even then, we get to the emulator issue. Now, I love emulators for a lot of different things, but when it comes to kind of the long-term survivability of a device, they can be a problem depending on how they're implemented. And this isn't like a serious, oh, we got to go fix a problem. It's just kind of a nature of the beast kind of thing. So something like an Android device, a Retroid, what have you, one of the things that they'll run into, and this is actually something the Steam Deck runs into as well, is that everything is dependent on how you have all of those directories set up. And you probably have a preferred setup, to have everything going. But if anything screws with your SD card, if anything gets messed up or whatever else, if directories just aren't pointing in the right direction, you can potentially run into frustrating issues that can take hours of tinkering to potentially solve. And granted, they're usually, hopefully, not that severe, but I'm sure everyone's had that experience where they go and they reinstall RetroArch or something on an Android, and it's like, where did you put all your ROMs? Okay, well, it's pointing over here. No, it's actually over here this time. Okay, this other thing has decided to point over in this direction, this other thing pointed in this direction. And so you're trying to reset up all your directories, reset up all your thumbnails, reset like all of your different settings for all these different things. And it's great to have those customizable options. But one of those other reasons that I love the Vita there is simply put because of a sort of uniformity to a lot of the way that those things are set up. So, for example, I will basically have had the same save files that I've been using from my PSP from when I was growing up that have been transferred all the way up till now and are still doing their job just fine. Occasionally they'll get upgraded to a newer memory card or something like that. Like obviously anything above 128 wouldn't even work back on a PSP. But over time, you just kind of keep those same directories and just upgrade them, just keep moving them over to a new thing. Because when it comes to something like PS1, save files or whatever else, for your emulator, you would have to have, depending on the game, multiple different types of files there. You got your your bin files and what have you. And in their particular case, you would have to have, like, let's say, I think it's like 20 different track files for something like a Warhawk, right? And so you'd go and you'd look at your, your Warhawk type of stuff there, and you'd have to go and tell your emulator, okay, ignore these other files right here, launch only this one, but then it launches without sound, and so you have to go get a different file format, and then you launch it with that, and oh shoot, it doesn't really like that particular format. Okay, let's go back, find which other format it prefers, for this particular device. And it can be frustrating to puzzle all this stuff out, right? So, in the case of something like the PSP and Vita here, it's just an eboot file. It's always an eboot file, and no matter what it is, it's like, okay, you got your eboot, you got your save files, there you go. You got your 2 files, that's all you need to worry about. It's all right there, it's going to run perfectly as soon as you put it on the device, and there's maybe like 2 or 3 games in the entire library that'll actually give you any type of difficulty, and then it's usually as simple as just picking a different setting with which to launch from. Like, it pretty much everything's already sorted out for you, it's meant to run all this stuff officially, and when it comes to other stuff, like for example GBA or GBC or anything like that, you just have your emulator that stays on the memory card itself. Many of those, sure, technically haven't been updated in years, and they're still doing the job just fine. Depending obviously on which ones they are, maybe you want to switch out for different things. But I know I've had both MGBA as well as GBA, what was the other one? The one with the cats. Kind of blanking on the name right now. Anyway, 2 different GBA emulators for, whatever games are preferred. There was a GBC emulator somebody made on some kind of dev boot camp thing, I think back in like 2017 or something, that's still the go-to for GBC stuff on a Vita there. If you want to have the more modern experience, you can have it. You can put RetroArch with all of your modern cores and whatever, but if you just prefer to have that one stable version that just keeps on doing its thing, by the way, this is freaking hilarious, then you just kind of keep on moving it forward, something happens to that Vita, you pop out the chip, you pop it in the new one, unlink it, ready to go, no problem. It's if anyone's wondered how I've constantly switched between Vitas all of this time, I've regularly switched between PSPs. Like, I'll get a device, I'll work on it, I'll fix it up, I'll make it shiny, I'll sell it, make a little bit of a profit, buy another one for cheap, work on that one while playing on it. It's like a little side gig I've been doing for a long time because I love working on these things. And it's just one of those things that's very convenient for just like popping in, getting going, and you don't have to worry about any complications. You're just ready to go within the hour, Anyway, so that's kind of the deal with the obsession with the Vitas. I really love these devices. These are things that I honestly would wish, rather than doing frickin' this stupid thing, I wish what they would have done was just bring back literally the Vita as it is. It's great as a device. Just give it a better chipset and you're all good to go. I mean, their main problem was the memory cards. It doesn't take a genius to figure that out, and it's frustrating that they didn't bother actually thinking that, like, just having any self-reflection there over, hey, this one stupid decision that everyone told us was a stupid decision. Nah, the market just wasn't there for it. Dude, are you kidding me? I mean, on the plus side, this also means that there's so many parts available for so cheap for these things that it's not even funny. Which, by the way, if you're ever looking, their prices go up and down all the time, but you can find them for pretty darn cheap. I was able to sell the parts of that Vita and basically get a functional Vita for more or less the same price. So it's just a matter of being annoying and throwing a lot of offers out there. So yeah, one more thing I just want to mention here while we have this up is the touchscreens. So for those that have never tried a Vita touchscreen, it may seem a little bit weird thinking like, oh, I need my buttons, I need my, extra analog buttons over here. You can't just emulate that exact feeling. That's not the same thing. You gotta have the clicky buttons. And look, I was right there with you for the longest time, but I gotta say, the kind of like 4 touchscreen buttons on this thing are something that I grew to really, really love over time. And this is especially true for like remote playing PS4 games and what have you. Like, I would just play Bloodborne on this thing. I think I made a video for that a little while ago, and then I scrapped it. I forget. Anyway, So, for those that don't know, there's actually four different buttons, four buttons on each screen. So, like, the front one has, like, here, 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 here. The back one is here, 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 here. And you can adjust, like, the sizes, where they are, the usual kind of things you'd expect to do with a touchscreen. Why is this a good thing? Like, wouldn't it just be more awkward? In most cases, I would agree, but because it's smaller than something like the Switch, you can very easily move your thumb from right here to right here. Basically, this just means that you more or less have, like, extra face buttons right here, and if you want them, you have the same ones on the back screen. I almost never use the ones on the back, but the face buttons right here are very, very convenient. I mentioned several times that, like, when it comes to Salt and Sanctuary, right? It's a really awesome Metroidvania there, where sure, I have the PC version, and technically it's the one that came with the new combat overhaul patch, and it could have mods and all this other stuff. And yet, it's always the one on the Vita that I want to play, because it's just more convenient to have your items on your touchscreen right here. Or like MGS2, where instead of the back buttons, you just have them right here. And it's very, very convenient. And if you're thinking smudges on the screen, I mean, yeah, kind of. It depends. So the 2000 is a bit more prone to having stuff on the screen, depending on whether or not you used a screen protector or not. The 1000, for whatever reason, with the OLED screen on there, doesn't seem to show smudges as much. I never actually noticed that until recently, when I was going and trying out that 1000 for the first time. It seemed far more resistant to smudging for some reason. Like, I almost never actually showed any smudges on the screen. So that was kind of unexpected. But yeah. So, personally, I find that really, really convenient. And again, because there's nothing jutting out of the back, the entire thing, if you looked at it from the side, is all rounded. It's very good for going in and out of pockets, in and out of cases, all of that kind of thing. Usually this is why I would say stay away from like the grips or the thumb caps or whatever else, because it gets in the way of that. But in its natural form, especially if you use some like a little bit of WD-40 on the edge of those sticks, they end up with like sort of like a plasticky type of feel to them. Basically, it's just constantly going to be able to go in and out of a pocket without too much issue. And if you're worried about it slipping, that's when you end up going and specifically putting like a rubber case on there or something like that, so that it can grip the sides a little bit better. But you can still pull it out of your pocket just fine. It's up to personal preference, but stuff like here, like even the the RP2 Plus is very, very pocketable, but because it's not rounded, like it's technically a little bit rounded. But like this will flip over in your pocket. Something like this will stay in this shape in your pocket because it's flatter and wider. Something like this will have those back triggers getting stuck on things as you're going and moving them around. Less so for the 3 Plus, but it's still an issue from what I've seen where they jut out a little bit, they get snagged on stuff a little bit. It's enough for those like split-second moments when you need to react to something right away. Those are not the moments that you want to have something getting caught on your vest or something, Again, this is a very dad problem, I know, but it's the kind of thing that I really regularly think about when it comes to having any kind of daily driver device. It's one of those reasons that I don't like a lot of the sort of like Game Boy variants that end up coming out, that a lot of PSP games that especially I like to cover on this channel, but generally most of the things I prefer are like PS1 and PSP games. But the 4x3 devices just don't really do it for me. I'm sure, here, let's see. I spelled that wrong, but whatever else. Like, this right here, this kind of look for GBA games, this kind of look for Game Boy games and whatever else, this is what I'm used to. Like, the kind of... there's a very distinctive look from like a PSP or Vita screen for old Game Boy games. It's not quite stretched, but it's very slightly distorted. I don't know what it is. I love it. There's just something about the look that just does it for me more than any other device. And I've tried using the 3DS and whatever else for this. It's just not the same, and I don't know why. I don't know why it's so friggin' charming. Maybe it's a nostalgia thing. I don't know. But either way, I don't know. In my opinion, it just looks absolutely great. So just in terms of performance, of being able to repair them, of just kind of knowing that there's enough community support to fix most problems, that there's enough spare parts out there to kind of fix whatever issues you run into, from knowing that they can punch way above their weight class. Like, these things are absolute featherweights, and they can still run a lot of things that you wouldn't expect them to be able to run. And actually, for that matter, let's cover the last thing I haven't covered yet. which is going to be the Vita actually. Here, what do we want to do here? The reason that I have this music playing in the background is the fact that while it does struggle with a lot of bigger games, the Vita is still able to run a lot of things that you would not expect it to be able to cover. Obviously, Borderlands is going to be a terrible example of this because it does run janky as hell, but here's the thing. Think about the last time they ran Borderlands 2 on anything. That device got hot, right? Like, it got pretty warm after a decent bit. Anything that's got more stuff going on will get reasonably warm after a little while, right? So tell me, do you see any fans on this thing? You don't, do you? Because this thing runs cooler than anything that I've ever seen for this kind of thing. Phones will warm up. Phones will eventually overheat. Those particular systems have gotten better over time. I've been told it's something to do with some kind of power efficiency setup thing they did for these. But they don't have a cooling system and they don't need one. They don't really get hot. Like, I've seen people accomplish a heat warning before. I have even overclocked my Vita and run it extensively for like an entire day and never had it even get warm. So I don't know how they would have potentially accomplished that. The entire cooling system on these things is basically a few little heat pads and some aluminum shielding. The rest of it just somehow runs on enough, just like low current or whatever else, that it just doesn't get warm. And obviously the PSP was the same way, which, by the way, it hurts me to see. Is this even showing? Now that I'm... Yeah, let's see. Is it actually showing that? Yeah. This kind of stuff hurts me. Like, seeing old devices just torn apart and put into pieces like this. Like, there's still good parts in here. What are you doing? Make it live, you bastard. Let it live. There's enough parts out there to make anything live. Dang it. Anyway, so that's just kind of my $1.27, more so than 2 cents, on more than anybody really cared to know about the Vita. So that's why I'm kind of obsessive about this device. As far as I'm concerned, it is the best handheld ever made. It's not the most powerful, it's not the shiniest looking, and technically it doesn't have the most buttons, features, what have you. But it's got that very unique blend of a lot of very oddly specific things that I personally value a ton. Especially the agility, the staying cool, the being able to function under a lot of different temperatures. Like, I live in Michigan. Days get really cold, days get really hot. There's a lot of traveling around that happens, and with the kiddos around, I need a device that will take a beating. Like, I have things that I'll play on my phone, but if we're being realistic, I'm not playing things on my phone 90% of the time, because when it comes to, like, even PPSSPP, I don't want to lose the entire progress of that fight, and I don't have that half second to go drop a quick save, because, again, the toddler is going to try to feed grapes to the dog or something, which thankfully does not happen that often. But if you didn't know, by the way, never feed grapes or onions to your dog. They cannot process them, just don't do that. But yeah, so there's that. And I love playing some, here, where is it, like, one of my favorite things for the Vita there, while I do primarily use it for stuff like Tactics Ogre and other PSP games, like, I just gotta say, it just makes me so happy. The fact that XCOM exists on the Vita was one of the main reasons I tried it in the first place. And as somebody made a comparison right here, yes, it does comparatively look like shit. This is true. But again, it's running on an Ultra Pocket device, basically. Does it have lag spikes? You're damn right it does. Does it have slowdown and glitches? You're absolutely right it does. Does your phone version potentially run it better? Absolutely. But again, this is always going to be my favorite version of this game. Like, sure, the PC version looks better. The phone version plays better. But the Vita version, it's on a Vita. I love it for having buttons. It's the only one with controller support as far as I'm aware, and it just feels better for it. So yeah, I love this little device, you know? It's a great little device. It's a great little pocketable dealie. It's absolutely the greatest handheld ever built as far as I'm concerned, and it just makes me sad that they decided to go for this stupid, like, I don't even know what you'd call it, like, airplane joystick looking portal thing, wherever it just disappeared to in the pictures. It's a shame we didn't get a Vita 2 or a PSP 3, but that has been lamented 1,000,001 times before. But yeah. Anyway, I'll make a follow up to this in the future when another Vita arrives, because the recent one was the first one that I actually haven't been able to save, courtesy of a dead GPU. But it did last long enough to go get about 20 minutes into a stream, so there's that. It was expected to be a complete paperweight, but still. So either way. Oh, and I should probably also mention the other thing. You can regularly find these for under $100. Retroid's going to be 100 plus. Something like those GPD wins are going to be like $500. Something like your Ambernicks are typically going to be around 100, 200, depending on what you're running into. And anything below that is going to be your usual kind of toaster tier, just random emulation jank that came out of China there, which can typically run a Game Boy, which good for them. They're typically like a Game Boy with extra analog sticks for all those games they can't actually play on analog sticks. But yeah, so I love this little thing. I'm sure, there will be some comments saying that no, it's still not powerful enough. Good for them. It's exactly what I'm looking for, exactly what I wish would come back into the market. I've always kept an eye on these random emulation devices, hoping that somebody will try to actually copy the ideas that the Vita did and do it successfully. But as of yet, that's a bit of a no-go, unfortunately. But that's about that. Y'all have yourselves a good one. Take care, and thank you for sticking by this rant. Later.